We are now just 2 days away from the official release of Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker by writer and director J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio, as well as creator George Lucas. This is Mike Zero. Make sure to subscribe if you are new to the channel for future content. Now, one thing about Episode 9 is that we do know that this film is very important to Disney and Lucasfilm, as it will determine the future of the Star Wars franchise and where things will stand. Now, a lot of fans are very worried about the movie based on the leaks and based on everything that has been happening with Episode 9, based on what they have seen in the TV spots and the teasers, you name it. Now, there is no doubt about it that director J.J. Abrams had to make a lot of fixes in this movie and really do a lot of patchwork for The Rise of Skywalker from The Last Jedi, I must add, of what Rian Johnson messed up in that movie so much. There was a lot of cleaning up to do by Disney and Lucasfilm, and today I wanted to talk about what one of the editors on The Rise of Skywalker had to talk about the actual movie, and how the editor basically destroys Rian Johnson and what he did with The Last Jedi, and how it presented complex challenges for Episode 9. So, in case you guys do not know who Marianne Brandon is, she is an editor of the Star Wars series, the sequel trilogy, I should say. She's also worked on The Rise of Skywalker. Now, this is what she had to say about director Rian Johnson and the challenges that he created for The Rise of Skywalker. Now, she states, "All I can say about that is that The Last Jedi I really enjoyed, but I will say it did present a lot of challenges in terms of where Episode 9 had to go to finish the saga. In other words, unfortunately Carrie died. She's a character that had to be figured out, and that was a challenge. Luke Skywalker died, which was a problem. So we had those two opposing problems. So I think what you're seeing trend is that the setup was difficult to deal with." So what Marianne just said right there, and there's more to this by the way, we're just pausing for a second. What she said right there is that Luke died, which was a problem. Oh, alright, so when we look at The Last Jedi, that was obviously a big mistake by Rian Johnson. It would have been more proper to send Luke Skywalker off into the sunset, either dying or vanishing into thin air on Tatooine, looking out to the real twin suns. That's how it should have been done. So that's what she said. So we had those two opposing problems, so I think what you're seeing trend is that the setup was difficult to deal with. Now, obviously, she had no control over Carrie Fisher's death, and that was a very sad thing that happened. That has nothing to do with Rian Johnson. But the thing that she brings up about Luke is quite interesting. This is what she has to say further, alright? This is where things get a little bit more direct. So, she states, "I think The Last Jedi director Rian Johnson is an amazing filmmaker. And I just think that when you're doing a trilogy, you just can't abandon a story. So whatever he chose to put in that film, those things are dangling, have to be dealt with." That's what she had to say. Can you believe that? So that's the editor of The Rise of Skywalker, Marianne Brandon. What she had to say about Rian Johnson and his approach to The Last Jedi. There's no doubt about it that The Last Jedi is the most flawed Star Wars movie out there, and not only that, it has a lot of problems. It is the very movie that divided the entire Star Wars fan base overnight. It literally was. It caused a lot of issues among many Star Wars fans and for the sequel trilogy and just Disney Star Wars in general. And like I've always said before in the past, it's such a shame of where things have gone since the release of The Last Jedi. You know, the end of The Force Awakens, you know, say what you will about the movie, but it was an entertaining movie. I could see why fans thought it was a terrible movie. I wouldn't go as far to say it was terrible, but I did see that, yes, it was a direct copy of A New Hope, and yes, it may have not felt like true Star Wars from point A to point B, but at the same exact time, it opened up a lot of possibilities. It opened up a lot of thoughts about where things could go for The Last Jedi, where things could go for Luke. Over 2 years, a lot of fans were excited about what The Last Jedi would offer, because the entire movie was going to be about Luke on that island with Rey. And Rian Johnson failed to really do that in a satisfying way for a majority of fans out there. So when the director, or should I say when the editor, of all things of the sequel trilogy, alright, especially for The Rise of Skywalker, when she has to say that I think that The Last Jedi director Rian Johnson is an amazing filmmaker, I think that she's just being nice, to be honest. I mean, he may be a good filmmaker for other movies, but he's definitely not meant for Star Wars. I think what she's saying here is that, yes, Rian Johnson is an amazing filmmaker, but he's just not for Star Wars. So she states, and I just think that when you're doing a trilogy, you can't just abandon a story. So whatever he chose to put in that film, those things that are dangling have to be dealt with. Now, again, she acknowledges that basically Rian Johnson abandoned, some of the story elements of The Force Awakens that now had to be answered in The Rise of Skywalker. And that's one of the reasons as to why a lot of the new reactions among many critics that saw the movie just last night are calling the movie convoluted, and as if it's 9 movies in one movie. That's exactly why they are saying that, is because we had to literally look at The Last Jedi and got no answers at all, not even one answer to a specific question. We got nothing really. Everything was unanswered. However, in this movie, everything that we want to know about Rey's parents, Rey's identity and her lineage, Palpatine, Kylo Ren, everything related to it in that sense will be answered. That all should have been answered at least partially, or at least half of it should have been answered in The Last Jedi. There is no doubt about that. And what Marianne Brandon had to say, I think I really do have to give a lot of credit to her for standing up to that. I think at this point, since we are at the end of the trilogy, there are a lot of creatives that don't really care. At this point, you have the cast, like Daisy Ridley, becoming a little bit more deflated in her interviews. You have Oscar Isaac expressing his concerns with The Last Jedi. The same exact thing, John Boyega, expressing his criticism about The Last Jedi. No doubt about it, there is no doubt about it. 3 years from now, 5 years from now, maybe 10 years from now, you're going to hear the cast and the crew bashing The Last Jedi in a more direct way, to the point where it will be very similar to how, Terminator Genesis was actually, looked at by the creators and by the cast and the crew, where they couldn't outright bash the movie on themselves right when it released, but they were able to talk about it more upfront years on later. Even Arnold Schwarzenegger said that the movie sucked. That's what he had to say about Genesis some years later. So it's going to take time. It's going to take time for more, the cast and the crew and the creatives to come out and talk more about The Last Jedi and how it just was an epic failure. In my opinion, it was a big failure, and I went over this a couple of days ago in my confession video about The Last Jedi. If you guys want to go ahead and check that out, just type in Mike ZEROH confession, it should pop right up. But yeah, like I say, guys, I mean, everything related to the reactions that happened last night, this really is a big deal because the reactions are divided. And the reactions are either expressing that they love or hate the movie, which is not what we got with The Last Jedi. We're talking about the reactions, not the reviews. This is, of course, critics. Critics that are able to go ahead and see the premiere. With The Last Jedi, most of the people were praising the movie. Most of the people loved the movie by what the reactions were like for Episode 8. For Episode 9, it seems to have turned a complete 180 here, where half and half, actually like it and dislike it. That's the scenario right now among many critics about The Rise of Skywalker, calling it convoluted, or how, some of the story elements are really not needed, and Palpatine's sequences in the movie are probably the only highlight of this movie, literally. And, there's a lot of different reactions out there. We went over a couple of them today, if you guys want to go ahead and check that out. But yeah, I mean, with that being said, guys, I think that this is just more proof that even Disney and Lucasfilm are aware that The Last Jedi is by far the most flawed Star Wars movie there is. It has a lot of problems and issues. It's pretty obvious here that Marianne Brandon had more plans, and that JJ and Disney, whatever have you, had more plans for Luke for Episode 9. And that also makes sense with what Mark Hamill was saying when he was on board with Colin Trevorrow, that he was on, board with Colin Trevorrow. Colin Trevorrow had plans for Luke in Episode 9 being alive, and Rian Johnson completely destroyed that opportunity. So, like I say, guys, I mean, I would like to hear what you guys have to say about this below in the comments, and if you guys did enjoy the content for today, do make sure to drop a thumbs up on this video to support the channel. I thank you all so very much for the kind support, and I'll catch you guys next time.